Joining me today for this special segment, we're talking to Tom Chartrand. Tom is the owner of Shoreline Media. You know, really exciting adventures you've had recently. You just got back recently from the Iditarod. That's pretty crazy.
In Alaska, yeah.
Yeah, and so you helped to film for the Iditarod.
Yeah, this was my third time. I mean, typically my main business is doing commercials and corporate video here on the Cape and Boston area, but I've also been involved with the Iditarod for 3 years through my involvement with Panasonic, because 10 years ago they sponsored the Iditarod and they took it from a tape-based adventure to solid state acquisition, and so it's a whole different technology to be able to shoot in cold weather, and the things that we can do now. And in my involvement with it is we get out there, we upload stories to the internet, stories of the mushers and how they're doing on the race, and we have a subscribership base in the thousands that people subscribe, and they basically watch as we go. We tell the story of the race, and by the time it's all done, we have a live finish camera up in Nome so they can see everyone cross through the finish line and see the dogs and see the mushers, and there's a lot of interest in the Iditarod, and they call it the last great race.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing too, because the Iditarod covers 1,042 miles. How long does it usually take people to complete the Iditarod?
Right, well, it takes anywhere from 8 to 10 days, sometimes 12 days, depending on the weather. It can get really windy and violent along the coast, so 2/3 of the way in, they have a ceremonial start in Anchorage, and they do an 11-mile run, and then the next day they call it the restart, where the race actually begins, and that's in Willow, and that goes all the way through the Alaska Range. They go through the mountains and the gorge, and then they end up on the Yukon, and they race along the Yukon River until they get to the Bering Sea coast in a town called Unalakleet, which is a really funky little town of about 800 people, and then they race along the coast all the way up to Nome. So you have weather conditions, you have all sorts of things that can affect, you know, how long the race is going to be. But this year was a record finish because it ended in 8 days. I don't know the exact, but eight days and a few hours up in Nome, and Dallas CV won again.
Wow, amazing. I cannot imagine. I mean, you were talking about the conditions a little bit earlier. You said it was only -1, which is pretty good. To me, -1 sounds like an awful temperature.
It was amazing, because they'd come into the checkpoint saying, oh my God, I can't believe how good the trail is, the conditions are good, the weather's perfect. I mean, last year I was up there and excuse me, they had to change the start of the race because it was so warm in Anchorage, they couldn't go over the Alaskan Range, so we had to start in Fairbanks. And the second day in, it was -40 one night, and it's the difference between 0 and -40 is basically your eyeballs begin to freeze and it's hard to breathe.
Wow.
You know, but it doesn't really feel any different, but you can't stay out too long.
Wow. So, you know, what also amazes me, I think, is that people come from all over to participate. Talk to me a little bit about where people are coming from, and you know what the individuals who participate are like.
It's amazing. They love their animals. A lot of them have kennels, and that's how they supplement their income, because it's quite expensive to get into the race. You have to provide all your own food, you have to provide everything that you need, all the dog food, and then get it to the checkpoints. So it's quite an expensive proposition to do, but many of them run their own kennels, and in the off season they do tours of the kennels and they collect money like that. They sell dogs, they breed them, and you know, so they're outdoors people. They love being outdoors, they love taking care of their animals, and they're from all over. We have some that are in the lower 48, they call it, you know, Wyoming, Montana, that begin down there, and they train up in Alaska, or many of them have moved up. In fact, the last 3 years, one of the top finishers was Allie Zirkle, and she's born and raised in New Hampshire. And in fact, a girl from Falmouth who grew up in Falmouth, went to Falmouth High, Sarah Stokey, was a finisher this year.
Wow.
And it's been her lifelong dream to be a part of it. And she and her boyfriend have a kennel, and it's her dream to live up there. I think she's 27 now.
Now, you mentioned Allie Zirkle, and actually there was a pretty interesting event that occurred, or not, a pretty sad event that occurred actually during the race that you were there to witness what was happening. Talk to me a little bit about this incident.
It had never happened before, and it made national news. But essentially, there was a big party along the Yukon, and up there, there's a huge problem in a lot of the native villages. The further north you go, there's a big problem with drugs and alcohol. There's not a lot for these people to do in the off season, and alcohol is a big, big problem. So some villages are dry, some aren't, some are wet. But there happened to be a party along the Yukon River when they had come in, and this one native decided to get on his snow machine. They call them snow machines up there. They're not snowmobiles. So when you hear the word snow machine from up there, it's not a big track machine. It's basically a snowmobile. But he decided to essentially play chicken, and he was out of his head and chased Allie, scared the life out of her. And the third person to come in, Jeff King, who's a four-time winner of the Iditarod, he actually hit his team and killed a dog. And it was pretty crazy for that night because it happened around 2:30 in the morning. So we were in the checkpoint where it happened, and unfortunately it turned out to be a person from that village of Nulato, the checkpoint of Nulato. And like they had said, the people love the Iditarod, the families, the children, they all gather. There's a picture of all the kids gathering around us. They cheer for their favorite mushers. And this was just one bad egg who'd had problems, and you know, it really gave a lot of the Iditarod participants and people a chance to focus on the problems in the villages. So hopefully it'll come out to be a good thing in the end for everybody.
And Allie was able to finish despite the challenges, which is also amazing.
It was an interesting story to the race because as we do the race and we upload all the videos for the subscribership, there's also a documentary at the end that people can order or rent and all that. And she decided at the end that she, you know, once the news got a hold of it up there, they were out there trying to get stories out of them, and really she wanted to focus on a race and continue with her dog team. So she decided to camp the rest of the way to Nome, which is kind of difficult because along the Bering Sea coast it's really cold, very, very windy, but she did just that, and she, you know, would go through the checkpoints, get her supplies, and go a few miles in and basically place camp. They lay hay down for the dogs, straw, and the dogs rest. They love it. And she slept in her sled, and just made a camping trip of it, and she still came in third. She's a fantastic athlete.
Yeah, pretty amazing. You've got to have a pretty determined spirit to
Yeah.
keep going through there. I mean, and to think about what they're going through. Get out there in crazy conditions for, you know, 8 or more days.
Right,
This is,
right.
there's
It's
no way.
1,042 miles, and it's so tiring. And when you get 2/3 of the way through the race, that's when it really becomes a race. And the front runners then really, it's like a chess game. You know, they have to take breaks. There's a 24-hour break. There's an 8-hour break. You choose where you do those breaks. And then towards the end, there's a mandatory 8-hour break. So it really is like a chess game. Where do we do this? How do I judge how my dog team is doing? And it becomes fascinating.
Well, and that's interesting too because how many dogs does each team start with? And sometimes they don't always end with the same amount of dogs that they
Right.
began with.
Yeah, so they usually begin with about 16 dogs, and you can see in the beginning of the race they're all ready to go. And then they drop dogs during the race. Sometimes they get muscle issues, sometimes they get tired paws, depending on the conditions. Sometimes going over the Alaskan range, there can be a lot of exposed, you know, wood, brush, stumps, you know, and that sometimes that can do damage. And they're very mindful of that, and a lot of times they'll come into the checkpoints if they have a dog that needs a rest, and they'll be sitting all covered up in the back of their sled. They have these little trailers, and you see a little dog head, you know, sticking out going, okay, I'm done. And this year's finisher, Dallas Seavey, was the fastest it's ever been, and he finished the race with 7 dogs. You know, and they were just a really well-trained team. They were some veterans from former races that he had done, and it was amazing.
Now, is there any way, if someone's watching and saying, wow, I'm fascinated by this, is there any way that our viewers could watch some of the video?
Sure. If they go to iditarod.com, they can check out what's there. There's some free videos right there. And then we do have what they call the Iditarod Insider, and that's who I worked for, was the Insider team. And it's a $30 subscription, and the money goes to the Iditarod to help fund the race. And then you get unlimited access during the race to that and different live cameras. And in fact, this year was the first time we had live cameras along the trail. They had partnered with a local broadcaster up there, KTVA, for satellite time. So we actually, at this one checkpoint, I know there's some pictures of Cripple. Cripple is basically a frozen lake 500 miles from any road. and we had satellite dishes there, and we had a live camera on the website to show some of the teams coming through, which was just amazing.
Wow,
to be there.
And think about it. Before this, there would have been no access to see some of these things.
Nothing, or they wouldn't have been able to see the video of it for a day or a day and a half.
Yeah.
So it was really, it's bringing it much closer to real time, and people love it.
Yeah,
all over
I bet.
the world. Yeah,
I bet. What is your favorite part of taking part? I mean, you've been a part of the team capturing video of the Iditarod now for 3 years. What's your favorite part? What keeps getting you to come back?
I think it's being out on the trail and mixing with the people in the villages and helping tell the stories. You know, one of them was we were in a town called McGrath, and their children were all involved. They get the kids out. It's the biggest event of the year for a lot of these places. Some of the schools shut down for the week so they can participate and take part, and we help tell the story with one of them, with one of the teachers in town, and the kids get so involved. So it's neat being in these villages and mixing where, you know, some villages have 30, 40 people, some have 100, 200 people, and they're just so excited to be part of it. So following that, catching the stories of the different mushers is amazing. And then the finish in Nome is exciting. You know, it's just wild.
Well, it's not an easy job for you, I know. We've mentioned the temperatures multiple times. The weather, getting there is not easy. It is a long event for you to cover. Do you think you'll do it again?
If they want me back, I think I'll probably be there. You know, we're there, it's about 3 weeks. You know, we get up there, we set up, we have a camera equipment that we rent. We have a team of 6 videographers that go out, so I have all that equipment to prepare. Then we're on the trail, and then afterwards we get to be there for every finisher. And so it's basically a week after the finish in Nome where we work on the documentary and capture, we video every finisher that comes in, get their statement, because they're just so excited to finish. They're exhausted, and frankly, they probably don't remember the finish as they're coming in. So we capture.
How many teams are there?
This year was the most, and it started with 86. I can't remember how many finished, but it was somewhere in the 60s.
Wow.
So high 60s, because people drop along the way. They can't do it. They can't stand the conditions. You know, they train really hard, but it's an arduous race. You know,
I
there's
can't even
a lot
imagine.
of different conditions.
I can't even imagine. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
stopping
you.
by today and telling us all about your amazing adventures in Alaska. We really appreciate it.
It was wild. Thanks a lot.